Stay home, Mom. My wife doesn't like you. That was the entire message. No greeting, no apology, not even a signature. I read it 3 times before my hands stopped shaking. The table was already set. My roast was in the oven. I had spent the entire morning ironing the same blouse my son once said made me look elegant. Now I was being told not to come. Not because of something I did, but because his wife didn't like me. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't family anymore. I was just inconvenient. There was a time when I was his whole world. When he was little, he'd call me Mama with a kind of awe in his voice, like I was magic. Every morning before school, he'd run down the hallway in his little dinosaur pajamas, climb onto my lap with his cereal bowl, and just sit there. No words, just warmth. My husband, James, would lean on the kitchen doorway, sipping his coffee and smile. "You've got a fan for life," he'd say. Back then, our world was small but full. We didn't have much money, but we had love in every corner of our home. I remember folding laundry while humming to Patsy Cline, while James tinkered with old radios in the garage, and our son played with cardboard boxes that doubled as castles, cars, and spaceships. Those were the good years, before things got complicated, before grief and time began changing everything. James and I had our own quiet rhythm. He worked construction, came home with tired hands and dusty boots, and never once complained. I stayed home most of the time, picking up sewing jobs or babysitting neighborhood kids to help with bills. We didn't take vacations, but we made Sunday pancakes and danced barefoot in the living room when our son finally fell asleep. And my boy, oh, how he lit up our lives. He was tender, thoughtful. He once spent all his birthday money buying me a second-hand necklace from a church sale, saying, "You're the prettiest mom. You need shiny things." I wore it to every school event, even if it turned my skin a bit green. He was so bright too. Top of his class every year. I still remember the day he came home and said, "Mama, I want to be the first in our family to go to college." James cried in the kitchen. He didn't even try to hide it. We were proud, so proud we didn't care what it would cost. When James got sick, our son was just 17. He tried to be strong, but I saw the fear behind his eyes. I saw how he held back tears when James started forgetting things, when his strong arms grew too thin to lift a hammer. And when James passed, just 2 days before our son's 19th birthday, something in all of us broke, but especially him. He changed after that. Not overnight, not in some dramatic way, but slowly, like a window left open during a storm, just enough for the cold to seep in. He stopped coming home after classes, started staying on campus more. I thought maybe he needed space, that maybe grief had just buried him in books and study groups. I clung to the hope that he'd come back to me in time. I gave up my wedding ring to help pay his final tuition bill. Sold it to a local jeweler who didn't even ask why. "It's just a ring," I told myself. "He'll get his degree. That's what matters." When he graduated, I wore the same floral dress I wore to James's funeral. Not out of sorrow, but because I knew James would have wanted to be there. I sat in the 3rd row, clapping like a fool when they called his name. He spotted me and smiled, a soft, distant smile. And I told myself that was enough. He got a good job not long after. First in the family to make more than $30,000 a year. I remember standing in the kitchen, hands still wet from dishes, when he called and said, "Mom, I just bought my first suit." I laughed. "What color?" "Gray. Like Dad's." Even now, when I think about that phone call, I smile and ache at the same time. I spent the next few years doing what I always had, supporting him, cheering for him, waiting for his calls. I never asked for anything. I didn't want to be a burden. I just wanted to be a part of his world, even if just as the voice on the other end of the phone. When he introduced me to Liana, he said, "She's a bit fancy, Mom. Don't be too, country." I laughed, brushing off the comment, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. Still, I put on my best dress, even bought new shoes. I baked my famous apple pie, the one he used to beg for every birthday. Liana smiled politely, complimented the crust but didn't touch it, said she was on a cleanse. I told myself not to read into it. After they left that night, I looked around the quiet kitchen and whispered, "That went okay, right, James?" But the silence didn't answer. There were still good moments after that. Like when he called to say they'd gotten engaged and asked if I'd help him write his vows. I cried on the phone. He didn't understand why. And when he married her, I sat alone at the reception table, watching them dance, thinking, this is just the next chapter. You'll always have a place in his life. But I didn't. I just didn't know it yet. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was a slow creeping thing like rust forming under fresh paint. You don't notice it right away. You smile. You keep busy. You tell yourself they're just adjusting to married life. The first sign came one Sunday afternoon when I called to ask if they'd like to come by for dinner. He paused. I could hear Liana's voice in the background, muffled but sharp, and then he said, "Actually, we're kind of tired. Maybe next week, okay?" Next week became next month. Then it stopped being suggested at all. I used to talk to my son almost every day. Just little things, a recipe I found, a funny story from church, or asking how his work was going. But after he married Liana, the calls got shorter, briefer, colder. He was always heading into a meeting, or just getting ready for bed. When I did speak to Liana, she was polite. Always polite. But that icy kind of politeness that felt more like customer service than family. She'd say, "Oh, hello," and pass the phone quickly back to him. She never asked how I was doing. Never said thank you when I sent food or little gifts. I once spent 3 days hand knitting her a scarf in her favorite color, rose gold, and she never even acknowledged it. Still, I made excuses. She's just not used to close family. Maybe she didn't grow up with traditions like ours. I tried to understand. I even bought books on blending family cultures because I thought maybe it was a generational thing. Maybe I was just being old-fashioned. Then came the Christmas that broke my heart. I'd been preparing for weeks, making peanut brittle sugar cookies, my late husband's famous cranberry ham recipe. I decorated the tree with ornaments from when my son was little. I wrapped presents carefully, writing their names in calligraphy. I even set aside a small box of baby keepsakes I thought they might want someday. The tiny shoes, the first lock of hair, even James's old pocket watch. They never came. On Christmas Eve, I got a text. Not a call. Not a knock on the door. Just a text. "We're spending the holiday with friends this year. Hope that's okay. Merry Christmas." No, it wasn't okay. But I didn't say that. I just typed back, "Of course. Have a lovely time." And then I sat at that full table, staring at food that would go untouched, hearing the echo of my husband's laughter in a room that had grown too quiet. After that, I stopped preparing. No more baking. No more knitted scarves. I still called occasionally, but the conversations were strained, forced. Liana always seemed to be just outside the frame, whispering or walking past with heavy footsteps. It was clear they didn't need me anymore. But what hurt more was that they didn't want me. One day I stopped by unannounced. I'd baked a peach cobbler, my son's favorite, and thought I'll just drop it off, say hello. I rang the bell and waited. Through the frosted glass, I saw Liana open the door halfway. "Oh, hi," she said. No smile. No warmth. "Did we forget we invited you?" "No," I said, holding up the dish. "Just thought I'd bring something sweet." She hesitated. "I wish you'd texted first. We're kind of in the middle of something." I could hear music in the background. Laughter. Glasses clinking. People. Party. I looked past her shoulder and saw at least a dozen shoes by the hallway, young, stylish, polished. My son appeared behind her, his face quickly turning from surprise to discomfort. "Mom," he said, "we're actually having a little thing for Liana's work friends." "I can see that," I replied softly. He looked at Liana, who didn't move. "I should have told you," he muttered, rubbing his neck. "It was kind of last minute." "I understand," I said, placing the cobbler on their porch step. "I'll just leave this here." He didn't bend to pick it up. He just stood there, watching me walk back to my car without a hug. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time that day, my hands on the steering wheel, the scent of warm peaches fading slowly into the air. That was when I started to feel it, not just sadness but something deeper. A quiet kind of rejection. Not loud, not cruel. Just persistent. Chipping away at me little by little. And then there were the money hints. Subtle things at first. Jokes about how expensive rent was. How they were still paying off the honeymoon. And wedding debts, no joke. Once he casually mentioned how it's weird that parents don't help more nowadays. Like our generation's struggling, and they act like we're entitled. I blinked. "Do you think I didn't help you?" I asked. He backtracked, laughed nervously. No, not you. Just in general. But the seed was planted. They were setting the stage for something. I just didn't know what yet. They stopped inviting me to big events after that. I only found out about Liana's birthday dinner from a neighbor who saw the photos online. You must have loved that sushi place, she said. I smiled and nodded, pretending I'd been there. The worst part wasn't being excluded. It was that I was slowly disappearing from their world, and they didn't even notice. But I noticed. Oh, I noticed everything. It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon. The kind of day when the sun feels just right and everything in the world seems like it should be good. I hadn't planned on going out, but a neighbor mentioned a small farmer's market near the community center. I thought it might lift my spirits. I hadn't seen my son in over a month, hadn't heard his voice since that awkward doorstep cobbler exchange. So I went, if only to be among people, even strangers. I was browsing handmade soaps when I heard it, my son's laugh. Loud, unmistakable. It stopped me mid-step. I turned, and there he was, standing in front of a booth with Liana and a few of their friends. She was wearing that peach-colored dress I'd complimented once, and he was in casual clothes, sunglasses perched on his head like he hadn't a care in the world. I watched for a moment, half hidden behind a display of lavender sachets. He looked happy. I wanted to believe that was enough for me, to see him smiling even from a distance. But then I heard her voice. I told you we shouldn't have invited your mom to the wedding in the first place. She made everything about her. My stomach dropped. She was grieving Dad, my son said, not exactly defending me, more like explaining me away. She's always grieving. Liana rolled her eyes. You'd think she was the only widow in the world. Their friends laughed. I couldn't move. I stood there, heart hammering, while people around me smiled and chatted and picked up jars of honey and loaves of sourdough like the world wasn't crumbling for me. She just clings too much, Liana continued. I told you, it's not normal for a grown man to have his mother call every week. My son chuckled. I know. That's why I told her to stop dropping by. I mean, she gets the hint. Eventually. I didn't hear much else. Everything blurred, colors, sounds, motion. I just remember the smell of basil from the herb stand mixing with the bitter taste of shame in my throat. They hadn't seen me. They didn't even know I was there. And somehow that hurt more. I walked home slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. I didn't cry right away. I couldn't. My body was numb. My mind was trying to protect me by pretending I hadn't heard what I heard. But once I stepped into the quiet of my kitchen, it hit me all at once, like a wave that had been building far offshore and finally crashed in. I dropped my purse, leaned against the counter, and let it all come out. The sobs weren't loud, they were the kind that get caught in your chest and shake your whole body. The kind that make you feel like something inside you has finally broken for good. I made tea just to do something with my hands. James used to say, when you're sad, boil water. It gives you purpose for 3 minutes. I made the tea, but it tasted like nothing. I sat at the table and stared at my son's handwriting on an old thank you card from his college days. Thanks for always believing in me, Mom. I had believed in him. With everything I had. I believed he'd grow up to be kind. Loyal. Good. I believed I mattered to him, not because I was useful but because I was his. And now I was a joke. A burden. A clingy woman who made everything about her. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the wedding. How I'd helped Liana pick the table linens. How I'd stayed late with the caterer when she got overwhelmed. How I'd paid the final invoice when they realized they'd gone over budget. Nearly $2,800. I never told anyone. Just pulled it from James's old savings account and called it a gift. I remembered how she'd smiled and said, "You're a lifesaver." And now she wanted me erased. I began seeing everything through a new lens. The missed calls, the canceled visits, the clipped tones, the way Liana would look around my house like it smelled of mothballs. I saw it clearly now. I wasn't welcome. Not just in their home but in their lives. And what crushed me most was that my son knew. He knew and let it happen. That next Sunday I went to church, sat in the same pew James and I used to sit in. When the hymn started I couldn't sing. My voice cracked and I just closed the book and bowed my head. After the service, Pastor Helen approached me. "You okay, Marjorie?" she asked, kind eyes full of concern. I wanted to lie. Say I was fine. But all I could do was whisper, "My son doesn't like me anymore." She took my hand, didn't say a word, just held it. That was the first time I said it out loud. And once I did, something shifted in me. The grief didn't go away, but it hardened. Became something colder. Not anger, not yet. But the start of resolve. Because if they wanted to pretend I hadn't given them everything, I'd remind them. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I learned the truth. Not through a family confession, not through an honest conversation, but by pure accident, the kind that feels more like fate than coincidence. I was at the pharmacy picking up my blood pressure medication. I don't like going in the middle of the day, it's always crowded, but I'd run out and something told me not to wait. I got in line behind two women chatting loudly, the kind of people who talk like they want to be overheard. Normally I would have tuned them out, but one name caught my attention. Liana. I froze. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when your daughter-in-law's name floats into the air, your ears prick up. She's been telling everyone she wants to put her husband's mom in a home. The woman with the red curls said, scrolling through her phone. Said she's too old-fashioned, too stubborn. Doesn't want her around when they start having kids. My throat tightened. She told my sister she's already looking at places near Greenway Pines. The fancy one with the big lobby, her friend added. Can you imagine? Her husband's mom. I don't think the poor woman even knows. I stood perfectly still. The women paid for their vitamins and walked out without ever realizing I was behind them. I clutched my prescription in one hand and my purse in the other, and walked straight to the bench outside. I didn't sit. I couldn't. My legs trembled too hard. I leaned on the iron armrest and stared out at the parking lot, watching people load groceries and check their phones and live their ordinary lives, while mine had just shifted without warning. They were planning to send me away. I thought of James again, the way he'd hold my hand when we walked past the nursing home down by the old fire station. Promise me we'll never let each other end up there, he'd say. We take care of our own. We always had. That night I went up to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since James died. The air smelled of cedar and dust. I pulled out the box labeled Kevin, College and Life, and sat on the floor with it. Inside were bank statements, tuition receipts, notes from professors, and the check stubs from the part-time jobs I worked to keep him in school. I found the receipts from the wedding caterer, the venue deposit, the car we co-signed when he got his first job. I even found a birthday card he'd written at age 15. One day I'll repay you for everything. I promise. I sat there in silence holding that card like it was a lifeline. But what made me weep wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that all of it, the years, the sacrifices, the love, had become invisible to him. I remembered the time he had chickenpox, and I slept beside him on the floor for 5 nights just to keep cold compresses on his skin. Or the time James had to choose between fixing our roof and paying for Kevin's science camp, and we let the rain come through so he could go. Now they wanted to start fresh, build a family without the clutter of the past. And I was part of that clutter. The next day I went to the bakery across town. The one where Kevin and I used to get donuts after church when he was little. The owner, Ellie, was still there. She greeted me with her usual warm smile. You okay, Marjorie? She asked, handing me a box of lemon glazed. I nodded, then shook my head. Want to sit? She offered. We sat in the back near the old coffee machine, and I told her everything. The text, the party, the market, the pharmacy, the attic. She didn't interrupt, just listened and kept my coffee full. I don't want revenge, I whispered, but I do want them to see, to know. Ellie leaned forward, then make them see. Quietly, clearly, with facts, not feelings. That night, I opened a new notebook and began writing. I made a list titled Contributions to Kevin's Life. I started from the beginning. Hospital bill for birth, $3,200. Diapers until age 3, estimated $1,800. I didn't stop there. Piano lessons he quit after 2 months. Braces. Prom tux rental. His half of the utility bills when he stayed with me after college, unpaid. Took me 3 days. By the end of it, I had 18 pages of documentation. 18. And then I wrote the number at the bottom. It wasn't about money. It was about memory. About value. About not being erased from the story I helped build. I sat in the living room that night, lit a candle by James's picture and whispered, "They're going to remember who I am." And I meant it. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. A week after I finished writing everything down, I decided to call him. Not to accuse, not to yell, just to ask. One last chance to give him a rope to pull himself back. He picked up after the third ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded casual, like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't quietly erased me from his life. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone light. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Sure," he said, but I could hear tapping a keyboard maybe. "What's up?" I took a deep breath. I was at the pharmacy last week. I overheard something about Liana looking into care homes near Greenway Pines. There was silence. The tapping stopped. "I just wanted to ask if that's true," I continued. "Because if it is, I'd rather hear it from you." He sighed. "Mom." That's all he said. Not of course not. Not that's ridiculous. Just, "Mom." "I'm not angry," I said. "I just want honesty." He hesitated. "Look, Liana's been concerned. You've been a bit emotional lately. She thinks maybe you'd be more comfortable in a place with assistance." I blinked. "Assistance?" "Kevin, I cook my meals, mow my own lawn, and drive myself to church. What exactly do I need assistance with?" He chuckled nervously. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just Liana thinks you might be lonely. And it's hard for us to always be available." My voice stayed steady, but my hand trembled against the phone. "So the solution is to put me in a home? Because you're busy." "It's not like that," he said, but his tone was defensive now. "It's just, Liana's pregnant." The words landed like a stone. Pregnant. There it was. The reason I was suddenly inconvenient. "She doesn't want the baby growing up with tension," he added quickly. "She wants a calm environment. And well, you and her never really clicked, you know." I felt something in me begin to harden. Not anger. Not yet. Just coldness. The kind of chill that creeps into your bones and says, enough. "So she doesn't want her mother-in-law around," I said. "And you're fine with that?" "She's just looking out for our future," he said. "I'm sure you understand." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I understood being pushed out of the family I built? That I understood being spoken about like a problem to be solved? He added, "We were going to talk to you about it next month. We didn't want to stress you out." "How thoughtful," I whispered. The call ended shortly after that. He said he'd call again soon. I knew he wouldn't. That night, I sat on the porch until well after midnight. The wind rustled the trees and somewhere far off, a dog barked. I looked up at the stars and whispered to James, "He's gone. He's really gone." But in that silence, something in me started to shift. I realized something important. I had nothing left to lose. The next morning I went to visit Marlene, my neighbor, and the closest thing I had to a sister. She'd been watching me closely over the past few months, always dropping off soup or inviting me for tea. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp. She just nodded. "I had a feeling," she said softly. "I saw Liana at the salon last month. She said some things that made my hair curl, and not from the perm." I laughed for the first time in days. She looked at me kindly. "You gave them everything. Maybe it's time you stop giving." I nodded. "I'm not giving anymore. I'm taking back." Marlene squeezed my hand. "Then do it right. No emotion. Just business." So I started making calls. To my lawyer. To the bank. To the notary. To an old friend who worked with housing nonprofits. Not for revenge. For protection. For dignity. And for truth. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Taylor, the elderly widow who lived 3 blocks down. She walked with a cane and wore her late husband's dog tags on a chain around her neck. We hadn't spoken in ages. She stopped me outside the post office. "You look different, Marjorie. Stronger." I smiled. I finally remembered who I am. She nodded. "Don't let them make you small." And I wouldn't. Not anymore. That week I went through my safe and pulled out everything that mattered. My will, my deed, my power of attorney documents. I scheduled an appointment with Mr. Green, the lawyer James and I had trusted for over 30 years. By the time I walked into his office, I was calm. Not cold. Not angry. Just clear. He looked over the paperwork and raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" I'm sure. He nodded slowly. You want to remove Kevin entirely? I want to protect what's left of me, I said. And if anyone contests this will, I want it all to go to charity. Every cent. He didn't question me again. Just started writing. That night, I slept with a stillness I hadn't felt in months. The damage had already been done. But now I was finally doing something about it. The smell of that law office hit me like a memory I hadn't asked for. Old paper, ink, and something faintly lemon-scented from the floor polish. I hadn't been in that room since James and I first drafted our will nearly 30 years ago. Back then it was full of hope. Now I was walking in alone, clutching a manila folder and a broken heart. Mr. Green stood when I entered. He looked older, slower, with more white around his temples, but the kindness in his eyes hadn't faded. Marjorie, he said warmly, shaking my hand. I was sorry to hear about the situation. Sit down. Let's make this simple. Simple. Nothing about this felt simple. I sat down, placing the folder on the polished wood table between us. It held everything. A printed spreadsheet of the expenses I'd covered for Kevin over the years, a copy of the college tuition ledger, wedding receipts, and even a printed copy of the text message that had set all of this in motion. He flipped through them quietly, nodding every so often, until he stopped at the final sheet. The handwritten note I'd scribbled just 2 days before. If anyone tries to contest this, the entire estate will go to St. Elizabeth's Women's Shelter. He looked up. You're serious about this clause? Dead serious, I said, my voice low. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it because I've finally accepted the truth. I'm not his mother in his eyes anymore. I'm just a relic he wants to forget. Mr. Green tapped the pen against the paper thoughtfully. This'll hold up in court. The way you've laid it out, there's a clear record of contribution, intent, even emotional manipulation. I'm not trying to punish him, I added. I just don't want what's left of James and me to fall into the hands of people who only remember me when it's convenient. He didn't say much after that. Just started typing. It took an hour to get the new documents finalized. When he pushed them across the desk for my signature, my hands hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because that final line, that signature, felt like a goodbye. Goodbye to the dream I had for my family. Goodbye to the son I once knew. I signed. He handed me a copy and stood to shake my hand again. You're doing this with dignity, Marjorie. That matters. As I walked out, the sun was setting. The sky was smeared in orange and lavender, the kind of sky James would have paused to admire, just long enough to make me stop and notice too. I clutched the envelope to my chest and whispered, I'm sorry, love. I know this isn't what we hoped, but I think you'd understand. When I got home, I placed the new will in the safe under the floorboards, right next to James's war medals and our wedding photo. I felt strange, heavy, but lighter somehow. For days, I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I just went on with my life. I made soup. I tended my flowers. I dusted off old photo albums, reminding myself that not all of it was lost, that there had been good years, even if they didn't last. Then one morning I received a voicemail from Kevin. Hey Mom. Haven't heard from you in a while. Just wanted to check in. Also, Liana's throwing a little thing for the baby. It's a small gender reveal. She thought you might be more comfortable not attending, but we'll send pictures. Anyway, hope you're well. I sat there, phone in hand, listening to that message on repeat. She thought you might be more comfortable not attending. They were cutting me out even before the baby was born. And yet, they still expected me to smile and wait for scraps. Maybe a photo, maybe a half-hearted visit down the line when the baby was older and didn't even know my name. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. The next morning I wrote a letter. Dear Kevin, you once told me you'd take care of me when I got old. That I'd never be alone. That I could always count on you. I believed you. But actions speak louder than childhood promises. And your actions, the silences, the exclusions, the disrespect, they've spoken volumes. I want you to know that I've updated my will. You are no longer listed as a beneficiary. Neither is your wife. If the will is contested, the entire estate will be donated to a women's shelter in my name and your father's. This isn't about money. It's about memory. And I refuse to be remembered as a burden in the very story I helped build. Take care of your child. Be better for them than you were for me. Mom. I didn't send it. Not yet. I placed it in an envelope and slid it into the safe beside the will. I knew the right moment would come, and when it did, I would send it with calm, steady hands. This wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was. I didn't think they could surprise me anymore. I thought the worst had already happened, the dismissal, the exclusion, the whispers behind my back. But life has a cruel way of showing you there's always one more thing left to take. Came in the mail. A thick envelope, formal-looking. No return address I recognized, but the paper had that weight, the kind that screams official. My heart sank before I even opened it. Inside was a letter typed cold. Dear Ms. Whitaker, this is to formally inform you that effective November 1st, the joint tenancy agreement regarding the property at 21 Willow Lane will be terminated, and your name will be removed from the utility and maintenance contracts currently under the primary name of Mr. Kevin Whitaker. We advise that you seek alternative accommodations by that time, as the property is expected to undergo renovations for future resale. It wasn't even signed by him. It was from a property management company. I stared at it for a full minute trying to process what I was reading. They were kicking me out. Not just from their lives. From my home. The house wasn't even fully theirs. When James and I bought it, we put it under both our names, and after his passing, Kevin begged to be added to the deed. Said it was for simplicity, in case something happened to me. I didn't question it, I trusted him. I didn't know he'd quietly made moves to shift the balance. I didn't know he'd put my name in second position, or that he and Liana had been slowly transferring more control to themselves over the years, using my trust like currency. I ran my hand over the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My tea had gone cold beside me. For days I walked through the house like a ghost. Every room held a memory. James's chair in the corner of the living room, the kitchen cabinets we painted sunflower yellow one summer, the hallway marked with pencil lines from Kevin's childhood growth spurts. Now it was being prepared for resale. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that evening and looked at myself. I didn't see a fragile old woman. I saw someone who'd been polite for too long. And I decided I would not be quiet anymore. I went to the safe, pulled out the letter I had written him, and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then I added the will. Then I added the printed bill. My documentation of every dollar, every sacrifice. I made copies of everything and placed them in 3 envelopes. One for Kevin, one for my lawyer, and one I would keep on me just in case. I packed a small bag. Not out of panic. Out of preparation. The next morning, I drove into town and spoke to Mrs. Heller, a notary and longtime friend from church. I told her everything. She didn't flinch. I knew something wasn't right, she said, handing me a pen. They've been trying to corner you. They just didn't expect you to bite back. With her help, I filed a formal objection to the property change. I sent a letter of my own to the management company, citing co-ownership, tenancy rights, and legal misrepresentation. I included a copy of the original deed James and I signed, the one that still had my name front and center. Then I got in the car and drove to their house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't knock gently. Liana opened the door, eyes wide. Marjorie, is he home? She hesitated. Kevin's working. I'll wait. She looked at me like I was a stray cat scratching at the window, but I stepped inside before she could stop me. The house looked like a magazine, all cream and chrome and not a speck of warmth. There were framed photos on the wall. Not one of them included me. Kevin came down 5 minutes later, adjusting his tie, clearly annoyed. Mom, what are you doing here? I held out the envelope. I thought we should talk face to face. He took it cautiously. What's this? Everything, I said. Everything I gave you. Everything you forgot. Everything you just tried to take from me. He opened the envelope and glanced at the top page. His face went pale. What is this? A record, I said. Of all I've done. Of all you've taken. And a legal notification that I'm not leaving the house. Not now. Not quietly. Not ever. Liana came up behind him. This is really unnecessary. I turned to her. You tried to erase me. You thought I wouldn't fight back. You were wrong. Kevin looked stunned. Not ashamed, stunned. Like he hadn't considered that his mother might have a backbone under all those casseroles and warm hugs. I've also changed my will, I continued. You're no longer in it. And if you so much as try to push me again, everything goes to charity. Every cent. His jaw clenched. You don't have to be like this. No, I said. I have to be. Because you made me. I left without another word. By the time I got home, I felt tired, bone-deep tired, but also clear. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself again. They thought they could box me in, sell me off, store me like some piece of unused furniture. They forgot who paid for the house they live in. They forgot who raised him into the man who had the audacity to forget me. But now they'd remember. I hadn't planned to go. The baby shower was meant to be intimate. According to the pale pink invitation I received 2 weeks after they tried to evict me. There was no warm greeting, no phone call to follow up. Just a folded piece of cardstock with fancy cursive, almost like they were inviting a colleague, not the mother who raised one of them. I placed the invitation in a drawer. And I didn't RSVP. But as the day drew closer, something in me shifted. It wasn't curiosity or even anger, it was resolve. This family, this life had been built on my sacrifices, and I would no longer be pushed into the shadows like some faded old photograph. So I put on the same pale blue dress I wore to Kevin's graduation, the one with lace at the collar James had always loved. I styled my hair the way I used to when Kevin was little, curled and pinned back. And I gathered the 3 envelopes, the bill, the will, and the letter. I slipped them into my purse along with a copy of the house deed, the original signed by James. Then I got in my car and drove to their house. The front lawn was strung with balloons and pastel streamers. A chalkboard sign read Baby Whitaker's Big Day, and fairy lights flickered in the mid-afternoon sun. I saw neighbors I recognized, relatives I hadn't seen in years, people who had once eaten my pot roast and borrowed my punch bowl. No one expected me. Heads turned as I walked up the driveway. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Plastic cups hovered halfway to mouths. I heard someone whisper, "Is that Kevin's mom?" Liana spotted me first. Her smile faltered for just a moment, then returned fake and tight. "Marjorie," she said, walking toward me, "we didn't think you'd be able to make it." I smiled. I wasn't sure either. But I thought, this is family, isn't it? Before she could reply, Kevin emerged from the crowd, his expression unreadable. "Mom, we weren't expecting." "I know," I said. "You rarely do." I walked past them, into the center of the backyard where the tables were set. I gently tapped my spoon against a glass until the crowd fell silent. All eyes were on me, confused, curious, a few amused. Liana looked like she might scream. "I won't take up much time," I said, my voice calm but clear. "I just came to deliver a gift. 3, actually." I pulled the first envelope from my purse and handed it to Kevin. "This," I said, "is a copy of every financial contribution I made to your life, your education, your wedding, your car, and more. Every sacrifice your father and I made, added up and itemized." He looked at it but didn't open it. The second envelope went to Liana. "This is my updated will. You're both no longer included. And if it's contested, the estate goes to charity. No appeals." Gasps rippled through the guests. Someone dropped a fork. "And the last," I said, holding the final envelope, "is the original deed to my home, the one with my name on it, signed by your father and me, before your name was ever scribbled onto it." I held it out. Kevin didn't take it. "I raised you with love," I continued, voice trembling just slightly now. "I held you through fevers. I sacrificed my dreams for yours. And I watched you become a man I no longer recognize. A man who let his wife decide that his mother no longer belonged." I looked at Liana, who stood frozen. "You told people I was too much. Too clingy. Too emotional. You mocked my grief. You planned behind my back. And you thought I would go quietly." I stepped back, letting my gaze settle on the crowd. I won't go quietly. Not from the home I built. Not from the life I helped create. And certainly not from this family." I turned and walked away, leaving all 3 envelopes on the table behind me. As I reached the driveway, someone clapped. Just one person. My nephew Jacob. Then another joined. And another. It wasn't applause for drama. It was respect. I got in my car, hands steady, eyes dry. And I drove home. They didn't call that night. Or the next. But the house didn't feel so empty anymore. I had my voice again, and I wasn't going to lose it. Do you think the mother made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The silence after the baby shower wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just still. No calls, no texts, no knocks on the door. First I expected a storm, a confrontation, maybe a tearful voicemail or a scathing message from Liana, calling me cruel or vindictive. But none came. Instead, the air around me settled into a heavy, uneasy quiet. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reaching out to fix things. I didn't check on Kevin. I didn't send a cake or a card. I didn't apologize for making anyone uncomfortable. I sat with the discomfort. Mine. There. And to my surprise, I survived it. The first morning after I woke early, my body on old habits. I made coffee and stared out the kitchen window at the garden James and I planted when we first moved in. The daisies had bloomed late this year. Bright yellow like tiny suns nodding in the breeze. They didn't care about inheritance or entitlement. They just existed, quietly doing what they were meant to do. I sipped my coffee and thought, so will I. Word traveled fast, as it always does in small towns. By Tuesday, I ran into Darlene from the post office who said, "Well, you sure made an impression on Sunday." She didn't say it with judgment. Just observation. Like someone commenting on the weather. At the grocery store, someone I barely knew put a hand on my arm and whispered, "Good for you." I wasn't sure if she meant it or just liked the spectacle. But it didn't matter. For once, I wasn't hiding my hurt behind polite smiles and fresh-baked pies. I was living in the truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. And it was uncomfortable. Every room in my house reminded me of the past, not in a sentimental way, but in that aching sort of emptiness. The living room where Kevin took his first steps. The kitchen table where James read the paper every morning. The hallway filled with framed memories of birthdays and Christmases that no longer meant the same thing. One afternoon, I took a walk down by the lake. It's something I hadn't done in a while. James used to take me there after his shifts. We'd sit on the old bench near the water, eating crackers and watching the sun dip behind the trees. I found that bench again and sat there for over an hour just breathing. Grief is strange. It doesn't just visit after death. Sometimes it creeps in when you lose people who are still alive, people who choose to walk away from you even as you stand still waiting. But somewhere in that stillness, I began to feel something else. Clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was exhausted. Tired of shrinking. Tired of second-guessing every word, every visit, every gift, wondering if I was too much or not enough. So I decided to stop wondering. That evening, I pulled out an old recipe box. The one with James's handwriting and oil-splattered index cards. I started copying recipes into a new book. One I could leave behind for someone who'd actually want them. Not Kevin. Not Liana. Someone else. Someone who needed what I had to offer. The next day I got a knock at the door. It was Ava, the young woman who rented the apartment down the street. She looked nervous, holding a tray covered in foil. "I heard you weren't feeling well," she said. "I brought tamale pie. My grandma's recipe." I blinked at her, touched. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind." She hesitated. I don't mean to intrude, but I grew up around here. I knew your husband, and I saw what happened at the baby shower." My stomach clenched, but I nodded. "I suppose everyone did. I just wanted to say, I think you were brave. A lot of women wouldn't have spoken up. I wish my mom had." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about her little boy, about trying to finish school while working nights. I really listened, and something inside me softened. Not because she needed me, but because I recognized myself in her. Young. Trying. Alone. When she left, she turned and said, "If you ever want company, I make a mean tres leches." That night, I lit a candle by James's picture again. But this time I didn't cry. Instead I said, "I think I know what I need to do next." Started with a chair. An old rocking chair James built during our first winter in the house. It had lived in the corner of the nursery when Kevin was a baby, then moved to the porch where I'd sit with coffee and a blanket. It creaked when you leaned too far back. A flaw James always said made it more human. One morning, I noticed the chair's leg had split. I brought it inside, intending to glue it, but something stopped me. Instead, I ran my hand over the worn wood and whispered, "You've held enough memories. It's time to give you new ones." That afternoon I called Ava. "Would your little boy like a rocker in his room?" I asked. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Positive. It belongs with someone who'll use it." Her voice cracked a little when she said thank you. That moment, that simple exchange, sparked something inside me. A thought I couldn't shake. What if my house, the one they tried to take from me, could become something more? Not just a place to live out my final years in silence, but a place of comfort. A refuge. A home again, not for them but for people who needed one. I walked from room to room taking stock. The guest room still had Kevin's childhood furniture. The office James used had been untouched for years. The upstairs storage room could be cleared out. 3 bedrooms. 2 baths. A big backyard. A kitchen with enough space to feed a dozen. I didn't have grandchildren in this house, but maybe I could still fill it with life. I grabbed my old address book, the paper kind with names crossed out and coffee stains on the edges. I called Loretta, a friend of James's from the union. Her daughter, Michelle, worked at a nonprofit that helped women transitioning out of shelters. Within 20 minutes, I was on the phone with Michelle herself. "You want to open your home to someone?" she asked, clearly surprised. "Not someone," I replied. "Some people. Maybe 2 or 3 young women who just need a start. Place to sleep. Someone to cook with. A warm bed and no judgment." She was quiet for a long moment. "You sure about this, Marjorie?" "I've never been more sure." Over the next few weeks I started preparing. First I cleaned. Really cleaned. I went through closets filled with things no one had touched in years. Kevin's old trophies, James's neckties, boxes of cards and newspaper clippings. I cried sometimes, yes, but it wasn't the same kind of crying. It was letting go, not losing. I gave away furniture to young families in town. I repainted the upstairs hallway soft cream, not the faded green I'd grown tired of. I had Ava's brother help fix the plumbing in the downstairs bath. I even bought new sheets. Not expensive ones, but fresh and soft. Each change felt like taking a step away from the past that had held me hostage. One afternoon, while sorting through the attic, I found a dusty notebook filled with James's sketches. Plans for a backyard greenhouse he never got around to building. I smiled. "Maybe one day, love," I whispered. When Michelle called back with a list of potential residents, I asked to meet them one by one. I wasn't running a boarding house. I was offering something personal. I wanted to look into their eyes and see if we fit. The first was a young woman named Kiera. She was 22, newly sober, and working part-time at a coffee shop. She reminded me of myself. Sharp-tongued but soft-hearted, fiercely independent but craving safety. When I showed her the upstairs room, she sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I haven't had a door I could lock in almost a year." The second was a woman named Elena. She was pregnant, just 5 months along, and had recently left an abusive relationship. Her voice was quiet, her eyes tired. When she saw the kitchen, she asked, "Can I cook here?" "You can cook, eat, sing, and dance here," I told her. "This is a home, not a shelter." Within 2 weeks, the house was full again. Not with noise, but with life. Laughter returned to my kitchen. Music played from behind closed doors. There were extra shoes by the door, mugs in the sink, voices drifting down the hall at night. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt needed. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because I had something to give and someone finally wanted it. Kevin hadn't called. Not once. And that was okay. Because now I was building something new, something his silence couldn't touch. One night, Kiera brought me a small plant in a pot. "For the windowsill," she said. "You've given us roots. Thought maybe we could grow something here too." I held it close and blinked away tears. "You already are, sweetheart." I went to bed that night with the door slightly cracked, not in fear, but in comfort. I liked hearing the creak of the stairs, the soft clink of dishes being put away. These weren't strangers anymore. They were part of something. My new family. Not the one I birthed, but the one I chose. Sunday mornings used to be the loneliest. After James passed and Kevin grew distant, I'd sit in that same pew at church alone. I'd come home to a quiet house, make tea for one, and sometimes wonder if I'd already lived the best years of my life, if the rest of it was just waiting. Now, Sunday mornings were filled with motion. Elena humming softly in the kitchen, scrambling eggs with one hand and resting the other on her growing belly. Kiera pacing the hallway, searching for her other boot, always in a hurry. And the sound of soft laughter. Ava dropping off her toddler so she could get groceries in peace, trusting me like family. It was chaos sometimes, but it was warm chaos. And it was mine. There was no obligation, no guilt, no silent scorecard of who did what. Just people helping each other. Leaning in. Showing up. I'd found my family. Not through blood but through presence. One evening, Kiera came into the living room holding my old sewing kit. "You know how to fix a ripped jacket?" she asked. I chuckled. "Sweetheart, I've been sewing longer than you've been breathing." She smiled, sat beside me, and watched as I threaded the needle. "I've never had anyone do this for me before." "You have someone now," I said, not looking up. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." That moment stitched itself into my heart more permanently than the jacket ever could. Elena, who was so quiet when she first arrived, began to open up in small ways, asking me for recipes, showing me ultrasound pictures, leaving little thank you notes on the counter. She told me one day over tea, "I've never had a safe place to raise a baby before." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You do now." Sometimes, I'd catch her touching the edge of James's framed photo in the hallway. She never said anything, but I knew she understood loss. And maybe that made her part of this home even more. Neighbors started stopping by again, too. At first, out of curiosity. "What's going on over there, Marjorie?" But then, with purpose. Mr. Henson dropped off fresh eggs from his hens. Darlene donated baby clothes. Even the pastor stopped by with a box of books and said, "I think you're doing God's work here." I didn't set out to create a community. I just didn't want to feel disposable anymore. But in healing myself, I'd made room for others. And they brought more healing than I ever expected. There was one moment that nearly undid me. Kevin's son, my grandson, showed up on my porch. Not with Kevin. Alone. He was taller than I remembered, all elbows and uncertainty. He looked just like Kevin did at that age. Awkward, wide-eyed, soft around the edges. "Hi," he said, nervously holding a card. "Dad said you might not want to see us. But I wanted to come anyway." I stepped onto the porch slowly, heart pounding. "You remember me?" I asked softly. "Of course," he said. "You made me banana bread when I had the flu." That tiny memory nearly brought me to my knees. "I miss you," he added. "I don't know why everything's so weird now, but I don't think you're a bad person." I didn't know what to say at first, so I just opened my arms. He stepped into them without hesitation. We sat on the porch swing and talked for almost an hour. About school. About books. About how awkward it was having parents who fought over things they never explained. "I don't know what happened," he said. "But I think grown-ups sometimes forget that kids are watching." I smiled sadly. "You're right. They do." When he left, he said, "Can I come back sometime?" "Anytime, sweetheart," I told him. "This will always be your porch." He turned at the bottom of the steps and asked, "Even if Dad doesn't?" "Even if," I said firmly. "Especially if." That moment stayed with me for days. It didn't undo the pain Kevin caused, but it reminded me that not all bridges had burned. Some just needed new footsteps. The girls, Kiera, Elena, Ava, started calling the house Marjorie's, like it was a place with a name and purpose. And one day, while folding laundry, Kiera said, "You should turn this into something real, like official, a place for women like us." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "A home, a shelter, something permanent. You already started it. Might as well name it." She grinned. "Marjorie's house." I laughed. "That sounds like a bed and breakfast." She shrugged. "Then let it be that. A bed, some breakfast, and a place where people feel safe again." I thought about it for a long time. About the paperwork, the work, the risk. But then I thought about James. About his sketches in the attic. About how he used to say, "Our home should outlive us." Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe it already had. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. Not the soft, polite kind I'd grown used to from Ava or Kiera. This one was hesitant, uncertain, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there at all. I dried my hands on a dish towel and opened the front door. Kevin stood on the porch alone. He looked thinner than I remembered. Older. There were lines under his eyes, and his shoulders sagged like he hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. For a moment we just stared at each other. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," he said finally. "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied honestly. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. For a moment. The house was quiet, the girls were out, and Ava's little boy had gone home for the evening. Still, the space felt full, not with tension, but with the life that had grown here. Kevin looked around slowly. "You changed things." "I had to," I said. "The house needed purpose." "So did I." He nodded, stepping further into the living room. His gaze landed on James's photo. "I miss him too," he murmured. "You have a funny way of showing it." He winced. "I deserve that." There was a long pause. I didn't fill it. I'd learned to let silence speak. He sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with a loose thread on his jacket. "I got your letter. The one you left at the baby shower." I nodded. "I've read it a dozen times," he continued. "And I keep trying to figure out when I became that person. The kind of son who'd let it get this far. When you stopped calling me Mom and started calling me her," I said quietly. His face crumpled slightly like he'd been punched. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he whispered. "I was just trying to keep peace with Liana. She never wanted closeness with family. Said it was suffocating. And you let her define me," I said. "You let her rewrite who I was, not just to her but to you." He looked up, eyes filled with tears. I know. And I'm sorry." I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. Apologies don't change the past, but they can change the future, if they come with action. He nodded quickly. "I want to do better." I tilted my head. "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because my son asked why we don't see you anymore." Because he remembered banana bread and bedtime stories, and I didn't have a good answer. Because I miss my mother. That last sentence cracked something in me. Not enough to undo it all, but enough to let something through. "I'm not the same woman you used to visit," I said. "I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not begging to be seen. I've built a new life, one with boundaries and purpose. I will not shrink again." "You shouldn't," he said immediately. "You shouldn't have to." We sat in silence again. This time it felt less heavy, just honest. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I just wanted you to know that I see what I did. And I regret it." I stood slowly, walked to the bookshelf, and took down a photo, one from Kevin's high school graduation. James had one arm around me, the other around Kevin. We were all smiling. I handed it to him. "That's who I remember. That boy. That family." He looked at it for a long time. "I don't know if I can be him again." "Then be better," I said. "Be someone your son can be proud of. Someone who doesn't erase people when they become inconvenient." Tears slid down his face. "Can I come back?" Slowly. "Not as your son right away. Just as someone who's trying." I nodded. "We'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it was a door left slightly open. He stood to leave, clutching the photo like it was glass. At the door he turned back. "What are you calling this place now?" "Marjorie's house," I said softly. He smiled through his tears. "That sounds right." After he left, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse in relief. I just stood at the window and watched him drive away, wondering what parts of him were still in there, and what parts I'd have to mourn forever. But I felt strong, grounded, proud, because I hadn't waited for his apology to reclaim my life. And whether he came back or not, I had already found what I needed. Would you forgive him? Or do some wounds never heal? Share your thoughts in the comments. The sign went up on a breezy Wednesday afternoon. Ava's brother drilled the last bolt into the wooden post just beyond the gate, while I held the frame steady and Kiera painted over the final brushstrokes in soft, forest green. The letters were hand-carved, not perfect, not machine-cut, but full of care. Just like everything inside these walls. Marjorie's house, where love is earned, not demanded. We stood there for a moment, the three of us quietly taking it in. Elena waddled out a moment later, holding a glass of lemonade in one hand and cradling her round belly with the other. "It looks official now," she said, her voice full of something warm. "Like it's always been meant to be here." I looked up at that sign and felt the strangest mix of pride and peace. Not because my name was on it, but because my life was in it. My values, my stories, my survival, my healing. All of it, etched into that home like fingerprints on a window. That weekend we hosted a small gathering. Not a ribbon cutting, nothing grand. Just a backyard potluck with borrowed folding chairs, fairy lights strung across the trees, and music playing softly from an old radio. Friends came, old neighbors, church ladies, a few kind souls from the nonprofit that connected me with Michelle. Even some of the women who'd passed through and found their footing elsewhere came back just to say thank you. There was no ceremony. Just food, laughter, stories, and a home full of people who weren't connected by blood, but by something deeper. Ava stood up at one point, glass in hand. "I just want to say," she began, clearing her throat. "Marjorie saved more than this house. She saved me. She saved my son. She gave us a chance when we had none. And that's what this place is now, not charity. Not a handout. A second chance. A real family." There were tears. Mine included. After the party, long after the dishes were washed and the porch swept, I sat alone in the living room, barefoot, tea in hand, and looked around. Everywhere I turned, I saw pieces of the people who'd come through. The knit blanket Kiara made draped over the couch, Elena's sketch of a flower hanging by the doorway, Ava's son's crayon drawing stuck to the fridge. It was no longer the house where Kevin took his first steps, or where James taught him to ride a bike out front. That house was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. And I had made peace with that. I'd once believed legacy meant passing something down. Heirlooms, property, recipes. But now, I knew legacy could also mean passing something on. Values. Safety. Kindness. Resilience. I still spoke to Kevin now and then. Short calls. Sometimes a card. He was trying. I could tell. And I appreciated that. But I no longer waited for him to be my everything. I no longer felt like I had to shrink myself to fit the role of the mother he wanted or resented. We were rebuilding brick by brick. Slowly. Carefully. One morning a letter arrived. Handwritten, addressed simply to Ms. Marjorie Whitaker. No return address. I opened it and found a folded note inside. "Dear Marjorie, I lived in your house for 6 weeks in the spring. I was the quiet one, the one who never came down for dinner. But I wanted to say thank you. You didn't push. You didn't ask questions. You just made sure there was always warm soup, clean towels, and space to breathe. You made me feel human again. I'm safe now. I'm working. I have a place of my own. But I'll never forget the first night I slept without fear. In a room with sunflowers on the curtains and a note on the dresser that said, 'Welcome home. With love, L.' I held that letter to my chest and cried. The quiet kind of crying, the kind that comes when something painful turns into something sacred. Later that afternoon, I walked to the back garden, where James's old chair still sat under the maple tree. The cushion was faded, and the wood had darkened with time, but I sat anyway, curling my legs under me. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We did it, love. Not just the house. Not just the girls. All of it. I didn't end my life in silence. I didn't let them write the ending for me. I took the pen back. The house lives again. And so do I. And this time, I'm not waiting for anyone's permission.